mercy, never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise. Teach me some melodious sonnet, sung by flaming tongues above. Praise the mount I'm fixed upon it, mount of thy redeeming love. Here I raise mine Ebenezer, hither by thy help I'm come, and I hope by thy good pleasure safely to arrive at home. Jesus sends me when a stranger, wandering from the fold of God, he to rescue me from danger interposed his precious blood. Oh, to grace, how great a debtor daily I'm constrained to be. Let thy goodness, like a fetter, bind my wandering heart to thee. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart, oh, take and seal it for thy courts above. Here's my heart, oh, take and seal it for thy courts above.
Trying to figure out what what God wanted me to talk about tonight, and what area to kind of talk about. And I went back and forth, and I was like, should I be like some of the prophets in the Bible and just randomly start calling out sin? I'm like, probably not tonight. I was thinking, should I pray that all y'all get right with God and donate $200,000 for the building fund? I'm like, I could, but probably not the best thing to do tonight. I went back and forth, and and thought about a bunch of different things, and thought about, we'll preach about faith, and, with the new building, and I'm like, well, all right, so we're going to preach some about faith, but not all about faith, so hopefully it'll be a blessing to you, hopefully you'll get something out of it. If you have your Bibles, go ahead and turn to Daniel chapter 3. I love the book of Daniel. Daniel's my favorite person in the Bible, hence my son's name is Daniel. I enjoy Daniel. A lot of different characters in the Bible. David. He was an awesome person, man after God's own heart. But he sinned with Bathsheba. There was some other sin that went through his life. But once again, God used him. Awesome character in the Bible. You got Peter. But Peter kept on getting rebuked by God. Peter kept sticking his foot in his mouth, and so forth. God still used him in a great way. Awesome Bible character. But Daniel's one of those ones where, from early in life went through trials, but he stayed faithful. He did what God wanted him to do. At a young age took a stand, which is, nowadays I think that's so important. We need more young men to take a stand for God, stand for right. But then throughout his life, he wasn't just like one time, took a stand and, but it was over and over and over throughout his life that, God used him. He took a stand and he was faithful to God. So Daniel's my favorite character. So I love the book of Daniel. And, there's so many different places in Daniel that you could preach about and talk about. So I started thinking about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in Daniel chapter 3. I'm like, all right, God kind of, confirmed that's what I was needed to talk on tonight. And then I kept going back to Daniel chapter 6 because I preached in junior church about Daniel chapter 6 Sunday, and my mind kept on going back to that. So we're going to kind of do a little bit of a comparison between Daniel chapter 3 and Daniel chapter 6. We won't take long for it, and then that will all be the introduction to get us to the actual message about faith. We'll talk about faith for probably 3 minutes, and then we'll do one other thing, and then we'll go ahead and go to the invitation. So we won't be long tonight. In Bible college, a guy told me, he's like, only preach as long as you are old. So I'm 25, so that means I have 25 minutes, and that's it. Now, Pastor Dawes, he doesn't go by that rule. But anyway, so if you go ahead and turn your Bibles to Daniel chapter 3 and stick your finger there, and then go over to Daniel chapter 6, we're going to kind of, it is Wednesday night Bible study, so we're going to be flipping back and forth through there. Like I said, we won't take a whole long time to do this, and don't worry, it's not going to be anything, super profound, mind-blowing, light bulb moment. I don't have those very often, so it won't be anything too deep. Just kind of what I saw, comparison between the two, and so forth. So, the first thing you see in Daniel chapter 3 and Daniel chapter 6 are powerful rulers. In Daniel chapter 3, verse 1, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold. Hey, Nebuchadnezzar was the king at that time. He was a powerful ruler. He was the most powerful man in the world at that time, Nebuchadnezzar. That's in Daniel chapter 3. Now you flip over to Daniel chapter 6, and verse 1, it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes. And you can go on and on. And we're just going to kind of take little bits and pieces out of these verses, not take anything out of context, don't worry. Just to get through it quickly, because I thought about reading all of chapter 3 and of all of chapter 6. But I figured that'd take a little bit longer, so I'm just going to take little bits here and there. So, but by all means, go back, read it yourself, fact check me on it, make sure everything I'm saying is true. But at this point, Darius is the king over the kingdom. And once again, at this point, Darius is the most powerful man in the world. So you see in Daniel chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar, and then Daniel chapter 6, you have Darius. So both of them, you have a powerful ruler. Hold on, I got that all mixed up. Hold on. That's supposed to be point number 2, is you got the powerful kings. All right. Now, point number 2, we're going to go 2 and then go back to 1 and then go to 3, all right? So, yeah, you have powerful kings in both of them. And then we're going to go to number 1, powerful rulers. If you look in verse 2 of chapter 3, the Nebuchadnezzar, the king, sent to gather together the princes, the governors, and the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. So there you see all the rulers of the land coming together. In our ranking system in America that we're used to, you have, the Senate, the House of Representatives, the Secretary of State, the Cabinet, the governors, all of them. So all the rulers of the land are gathered together there in verse 2 of Daniel chapter 3. Now you go to Daniel chapter 6, look in verse 4. Then the president and princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom. Here you have a group of powerful people coming together. You have the presidents and princes of all the land. So King Darius set up 120 princes over all the kingdom, and then above them had 3 presidents. So, the 123 most powerful under the king are all gathered at that point. So you see in both chapters, powerful rulers, and then, like I said before, you had powerful kings, but not just powerful kings, but they were proud kings. Nebuchadnezzar was making an image of himself, which means he thought he was the stuff. He thought he was the LeBron James, or, want to be LeBron James. Everybody knows Michael Jordan's better. But anyway, so, he thought he was the best thing ever, so he made a golden image of himself. he was a very proud king. If you look over in chapter 6, I'll give Darius a little bit more credit. He did some good stuff. He wasn't as whatever. But those some of those presidents and princes got to him, build up his head, saying how great Darius was. And then he made a decree, which we'll see here in a few minutes. So both of them had proud moments in their life. You see, we're flying through this. We already done point number 2 and then point 1. So 2 points done, and we only got 10 points to go. So don't worry, we're going to fly through this. Next, there were unreasonable decrees in both of them. In Daniel chapter 3, there was the decree that they had to, whenever the music was played, they had to worship the golden image. We all know the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego when the trumpets and the sackbuts and all the different instruments were played. They were supposed to bow down and worship the golden image, and which was an unreasonable decree to worship Nebuchadnezzar's image. Would have been going against God, so they couldn't do it. And then you go to chapter 6, and Darius made a decree that for 30 days they could not worship or pray to any god other than Darius. And once again, as a Christian, it's sad that nowadays that probably wouldn't affect most Christians. Go 30 days without praying. A lot of people, the only time they pray is in church. But we're not going to hit on that right now. We're going to keep moving. But they knew Daniel prayed 3 times a day. And as a Christian, that should mess up your schedule if you couldn't pray at all to anybody but the king. So we see unreasonable decrees in both. Next, you see bad accusers in both. I was trying to think of a better word than bad, but that was the only thing that came to mind, so we stuck with bad. They were not good people. Bad accusers. So in verse 8 of chapter 3, it says, "Wherefore at that time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. They saw that these 3 weren't bowing, and they went and told on them." They accused them of not bowing. And then you go to chapter 6, and you see that the presidents and princes gained up and went to the king, and we won't get into all of it, but kind of deceived the king, kind of pulled the wool over his eyes, made him a little proud, and then talked him in. They lied and won and said they all got together. Well, Daniel wasn't there, so therefore all of them was a lie. But told him that everybody wanted him to do it. So he signed a decree. But those princes and presidents got together and conspired for that plan. And they were bad accusers. And you see later in chapter 6 where they went and they were waiting for Daniel to pray. And once he did, they accused him of it and so forth. But just kind of side note there, a negative attitude always spreads. If you see there, I guarantee you, in chapter 6 and verse 3, "Then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and the princes, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm." Anytime anybody has power or any power is involved, people get selfish, people get proud, they want more power and more power. And they saw that Daniel was liked more than they were, so I'm sure it was one of those things where they're like, "Hey man, how come he's in charge of us? We could do this better than he could. Why in the world does king like him more than me? I am way better looking than he is. I'm smarter than he is. Why?" And before you know it, a bad attitude spreads. And in a church, if you have a bad attitude about something, it's going to spread. If you have a negative attitude, it's going to spread in a school, in a Sunday school class, whatever. A bad attitude always spreads. A negative attitude never helps anything. So you see bad accusers in both. Next, if you look in verse 16 of chapter 3, so go over to chapter 3. Let's see. Verse 16 through 18, it says, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up." So there you see faithful servants of God standing against wrong. They knew that they were going to be thrown in the fiery furnace, but they took a stand that they weren't going to do what was wrong. So you see that in chapter 3. Now you go to chapter 6. If you look in verse 10, now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being opened in the chamber towards Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he did aforetime. Hey, it would have been very easy to not have went and prayed that one time. It wouldn't have been that big of a deal. Just once, not praying. No, but he was faithful. He did what he did every day. He wasn't going to let what the government said deter him from doing what God wanted him to do. So you see faithful servants standing against wrong and doing what's right in Daniel chapter 3 and then Daniel chapter 6. Now, there's an absolute death penalty in both. Obviously, verse 3, a fiery furnace, I don't want to be in there. I mean, I hate hot stuff to begin with. I'm a girl when it comes to hot sauce and anything spicy. But when it comes to temperature hot, man, I sweat all the time. So, I mean, I can walk outside and I'm drenched in sweat. But anyway, so, that fiery furnace was a guaranteed death. It wasn't one of those things where you're going to go in, you're going to get burnt, and then come out the other side. No, when they threw you in there, you were going to die. It was worse than the electric chair. I mean, there's stories about people, living through the electrical chair and so forth. And, it was a guaranteed you were going to die in that fiery furnace. And then, not to mention in this particular story, the king had him turn it up hotter. The guys who were throwing them in there died. That's how hot it was. So it was guaranteed they were going to die. And then you see in chapter 6, the lions then. All right. I don't want to be near a lion ever. So when you go to the zoo, those lions are for the most part fairly tamed. I mean, if you jumped in, they'll probably still eat you. But they're fed. They're trained, and some of them are trained in different stuff. But here, these lions weren't the lions at the nearest zoo. No, these were lions that were not fed. They would not feed these lions, so that whenever they threw someone in there, they weren't just lions. They were starving lions that were going to kill whatever was thrown in there. So these lions were guaranteed they were going to die if they got thrown in there. Which is why Darius, stayed up all night praying that God would deliver him from it, because he knew it was a guaranteed death. So we see an absolute death penalty in both of them. Next, we see God's presence in both. If you go to chapter 3 and verse 24, it says that Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished and rose up in haste and spake and said unto his counselors, Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto thee, King, True, O king. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Hey, Jesus was with them. When the trial came, when they took a stand, absolute death penalty was coming, God was there with them. Now watch. Just a little side note. The form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Hey, the world knows what Jesus looks like. As Christians, we need to be showing them that. I mean, I think that's one reason why America has gone, the way it has, is because, you walk out in public and most Christians look just like the world. There is no difference other than one goes to church once a week or twice a week or whatever. But, we need to have Christ in us. Christ should be shining through us as Christians. And the world will see it and will know it. And then you go to chapter 6 and verse 22. We see, my God hath sent his angel. Hey, in the Bible, sometimes where it talks about an angel, it's referring to the Spirit of God there. And I think it might be in a Sunday school lesson in a couple weeks, so a little side note there. Anyway, God sent his angel there. God's presence was with both of them when these trials came in their lives. And then we see God's deliverance. You go to chapter 3 and verse 27. And I think 27. Yes, 27. And the princes, governors, and captains, and the king's counselors being gathered together saw these men upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was an hair of their head singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. Hey, just, kind of a different thought there. Upon whose body the fire had no power. Hey, hell's fire has no power on us if we're saved. If we're saved, we're going to heaven, and hell's fire has no power. Anyway, I just thought about that. So, then you go over to chapter 6 and verse 22. It says, my God hath sent his angel and hath shut the lions' mouths that they have not hurt me. Hey, those hungry lions, it would have taken a miracle for them not to even open their mouths. But you know what? God closed each of their mouths to where none of them even opened their mouths to try to eat him. And so there we see God's deliverance in both stories of Daniel chapter 3 and Daniel chapter 6. Next, we see a second decree made. So all these kings, am I still on? Yes, all right. All these kings, in the beginning of the chapters, made a decree going against God. They both made a decree, one that you had to worship his golden image, and the other you could not worship or pray to any god except the king. But there's a second decree in both chapters. If you look in verse 29 of chapter 3, it says, Therefore I make a decree that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. Hey, his heart was changed. The king went from full of himself and wanting no one to worship anybody but him to all of a sudden now, hey, if you talk against their God, I'm going to cut you in pieces. I mean, there was a second decree made there that was to glorify God and magnify God. You look in chapter 6 and verse 26, we see, I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and steadfast forever, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. Hey, Darius made a decree that nobody could worship anybody but him for 30 days, and all of a sudden now he made a second decree, hey, that's the living God, and we need to worship him. So, in all the kingdom, most powerful man in the world signed a decree that no one can talk bad about that, about the living God. That's pretty powerful. We see, so 2 decrees, or a second decree, in both of those to magnify God. And then last, we see that the servants prospered. The servants prospered. If you look in chapter 3 and verse 30, it says, Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Hey, they got a promotion. I mean, let's be real. I don't want to go through a fiery furnace to get a promotion. But that's what happened in their life. They went through a trial. God delivered them. It made an awesome impact on the whole world. And then they got a promotion for it. And once again, not even to mention, the treasures they got in heaven for it and all that. But on earth, they were promoted. And then if you look in chapter 6 and verse 28, So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Hey, Daniel prospered after he went through this trial. When trials come in our lives, sometimes it seems like it's the end. We can't handle it. What are we going to do? But hey, at the end of it, there's always going to be some prosperity that's going to come from it. There's always going to be good on the other end. You might not see it. It might not be, hey, here's a promotion at work. But in some way or aspect, after every trial, there will be some prosperity coming your way for servants of God. All right. Now we're through the introduction. Go ahead and go over to Daniel chapter 3. All right. The text verse for tonight. We're going to read 16, 17, and 18 again. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Hey, as Christians, we're supposed to live by faith. Faith is very important, and we're not going to dwell a whole long time on it. But watch. There's different levels of faith. I mean, there's faith that, to just say God can do anything. There's a whole other level of faith to, be thrown into lion's den and, have faith that God's going to deliver you from it. But I'll even take it a step farther. Not necessarily a different level of faith, but a different kind of faith. And that is the but if not kind of faith. So just for a second here, we'll talk about it. They said here in verse 17, if it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us. Hey, God is able to do anything. God is able to give us the new building. God is able to do anything He wants to do. And then it says, and He will deliver us out of thine hand, O King. Hey, God will give us a new building. God will do what you pray and ask Him to do. But then you have the but if not kind of faith. Now watch, just for a second. Hey, as Christians, we know God can do whatever. But there is a difference between knowing God is going to do what you want Him to do and knowing that God's going to do what He wants to do. Now watch. Sometimes our will does not match up with God's will. Sometimes our wants don't match up with God's wants. Now, you know what? Sometimes God will still give us our wants if it isn't, the exact same thing that He wants, because, if it's not something bad. I mean, if you want a new car, God might give you a new car. But sometimes, even if it's good stuff, God might have a different plan. And here, they had faith that God is able to deliver them. God will deliver them. But if God chooses not to deliver them, hey, that's still my God and I'm still serving Him. They had faith that even if God chose not to deliver him, even if they said, even if God chooses not to save us from this fiery furnace, you know what? He's still a great God. We're still going to heaven. And you know what? I'm not serving you, King. I'm not serving the world. I'm serving God because He's great. He saved us. Here we see that God is able to give us a building. God will give us a building. But if God doesn't give us the 2-story building that we want, He's still going to give us something. He's still going to provide something. As we're going, God's going to give us the building that we need over there. God's going to provide one way or another. God has not had our church get to where it's at to not provide something else. God doesn't want our church to die. God's not going to let our church die. If we keep going forward for Christ, He's going to keep blessing us. Now, sometimes it's exactly how He wanted it to be. Maybe, from us knocking doors and handing out flyers, maybe there's some millionaire, we put a flyer on their door and they're going to come write a $200,000 check tomorrow for the new building. It's possible. It's possible that somebody's going to come and write a $2 million check and pay for the whole building. God can do it. Amen. But it might be that God is going to choose to do something a little bit different. Maybe it's, like Pastor talked about Sunday, possibility maybe just a 1-story building instead of a 2-story building to start off. That might be it. It might be that, God's going to talk to each one of us to give a little bit extra, and then altogether it might be enough for it. Who knows? God has a plan, and we need to have faith that whatever God's plan is, it's the best plan. It's going to be what we need to do. Now, I went back and forth if I was going to do this. And I figured, why not? I'm the one preaching tonight. So, I can't get in trouble from Pastor until he comes back next week. So, all right. So, I've ran a lot of junior churches, bus routes. So, I haven't preached in church a whole lot. So, what we're going to do is this. I need a few volunteers. So, and before you volunteer, I'm going to give you a verse. You're going to find it, come up and read it into a microphone. So, if you're not comfortable with it, that's fine. I'm fine with reading every single one of these if that's going to be it. So don't feel pressured to it, but I figured we'd change it up a little bit. So if you're willing to, and if you want to come up and read a verse for me, raise your hand. All right, go ahead and come on up here. I'm going to give you Leviticus chapter 25 and verse 23, okay? Leviticus 25:23. Who else I got? I saw another hand over here. All right. I'm going to give you Psalms 24 and verse 1, okay? Psalms 24 and verse 1. Do I got any? All right. I'm going to give you Psalms 50 and verse 10. Psalms 50 verse 10. Do I have anybody else? All right, I'm going to give you Psalms 104 verse 24. Psalms 104, 24. Do I have another? All right, Austin, I'm going to give you Haggai 2:8. Give you the hard one, Haggai 2:8. All right, we'll give you 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 26. 1 Corinthians 10, 26. And then, brother, back there, I'm going to give you Hebrews 3 and verse 4. Hebrews 3, 4. You know what? We're going to do this. Now, Pastor just doesn't watch the live stream. He'll never know. I feel like he might watch the live stream, though, just to check out. All right. You're taller than I am.
Just a little bit.
All right, so you have Leviticus 25, 23.
Leviticus chapter 25 and verse 23 says, "The land shall not be sold forever, for the land is mine, for ye are strangers and sojourners with me."
All right, who had Psalms 24, verse 1? All right, go ahead and come on up. If you're one of them, just go ahead and come on up and line up here, and then we'll make this speed up just a little bit. So this is Psalms 24 and verse 1.
Psalm 24, 1. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein.
All right, who had Psalms 50 and verse 10? All right, this is Psalms 50, verse 10.
For every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle upon 1,000 hills.
All right, are y'all getting kind of the theme we're going here? God owns everything. God's in control of everything. All right, who had Psalms 104, verse 24? All right.
O Lord, how manifold are thy works! In wisdom hast thou made them all. The earth is full of thy riches.
Hey, the earth is full of God's riches, not man's riches. All right, who had Haggai 2:8? Was that you? All right, did you find it? All right.
Haggai 2:8. The silver is mine and the gold is mine, saith the Lord of hosts.
Hey, it's not the Federal Reserve's, it's God's. All right, who had 1 Corinthians 10:26? Was that you? I think it's supposed to be Corinthians, so I might have said it wrong. So 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 26. 10:26. And I saved you for last because I like that one. I like all of them, but we're going to end on that one. All right, so this is 1 Corinthians 10, verse 26.
For the earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof.
Yep, all right. And then, brother, Hebrews 3, verse 4. Hey, there's a theme to all these verses. This not just Old Testament, not just New Testament, not just verses taken out of context. This is the whole Bible, and there's more of them. I have a whole list of them. This is just a few of them. I didn't want to take up the whole night with it, but I figure it's Bible study, so we can go through a few different verses in the Bible. Hey, God owns everything. God's in control of everything. He can do whatever he wants to do. All right, now this, I figured I'd end on this one. I like this one.
Hebrews chapter 3, verse 4. For every house is builded by some man, but he that built all things is God.
Hey, God can build a building. God can build a church. God can build whatever God wants to build. You know, as humans, we're not going to stop God. God allows us to be used. God is not going to be hindered by mankind. You know what? God gave us the privilege and ability to serve him and to work in his church and build his church. Hey, he left it up to us to be able to do something to glorify and honor him. And I believe the next step for this church is getting that building up there. And once again, we have faith that God's going to do it. Maybe how we want, maybe something different, but we have faith God is going to do it. And you know what? God owns everything. It's no problem for God. $200,000, I wouldn't make that in like 10 years. But you know what? God, That's nothing to him. He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. All the gold, all the silver his. He can build whatever he wants to build. And we heard all the verses right there about it. And there's more. I encourage you, if you're like, well, Brother McArthur, I don't know if that's really in context of, God really controls everything. Hey, do a Bible study on it. I dare you. Do a Bible study on God owning everything and God being able to do. God's not hindered by anybody or anything. $200,000 might seem like a lot to hinder us, but hey, that's nothing to God. All right, let's go ahead and close our eyes and bow our heads. Let's go ahead and pray, and then we'll go into invitation for a few minutes, and then we'll go to the prayer groups after that. Dear Lord Heavenly Father, we come to you in prayer tonight. Just once again, thank you for the ability and privilege to just kind of come together and maybe get something out of your word, God. Obviously, I'm so unworthy to be up here and to be reading your word in front of people, God, but you chose to use sinners like us, God. Just thank you for allowing us to have some part in your plan, God. Just ask that you please help everyone to have gotten something from the message, Lord. I know I'm not the best speaker or anything, God, but your word's more powerful than any speaker is, God. Just ask that you please help it to have touched everyone in some way or another, God. Just please help the remainder of the service. And we ask all these things in your name. Amen. We'll leave the invitation open just for a couple minutes. If there's something in your heart that needs to get right, come forward and get it right. If you need somebody to pray with you, we're here to pray with you. We can talk about, God saving country, but it all starts off with, turning back to Christ. I'd hate for it to be said that revival didn't happen in Faith Baptist Church because of something in my life. So if there's anything that you need to pray about, go ahead and feel free to come forward and pray. We won't drag out the invitation for a long period of time. It's not my job to prick your heart or pull in your heart. It's God's. So I'll stop talking and maybe you need to just take just a moment to, not just say we have faith, but pray that God's going to provide a building. It's easy to talk the talk. It's a little different to walk the walk. It's said, work like it all depends on you, but pray like it all depends on God, because it does all depend on God. Alrighty, we're going to go ahead and transition over into the prayer request times. Did everybody get a prayer